There comes a moment when something changes, quietly, without permission. The world around you still looks the same, but it doesn't feel the same anymore. Conversations sound hollow. Laughter feels rehearsed. And the life everyone calls normal begins to look like a play with forgotten lines. That's how clarity enters, not as thunder, but as a fracture. A subtle crack between what is real and what is performed. And once light finds that opening, there is no way to unsee. Carl Jung once said, "To become conscious is a painful process." And that's the truth few will ever admit. Seeing too clearly hurts. Because with truth comes the unbearable weight of illusion. You start noticing the patterns, the lies, the masks. You see the invisible machinery behind people's smiles, the fear beneath their ambition, the emptiness behind their confidence. What once felt colorful now feels transparent. Not because beauty is gone, but because you've learned to see the shadows beneath the glow. To see is to lose. You lose innocence, comfort, belonging. But in that loss, you gain depth, like someone who dives so deep that silence begins to have a sound. You never asked to awaken, but something in you got tired of pretending to sleep. And once your eyes are open, they cannot close again. We live inside a theater of mirrors. Everywhere you look, someone is performing certainty about beauty, success, love, enlightenment. The script is simple: look flawless, sound confident, never slow down. And if you ever feel lost or tired, hide it behind a smile and a quote about self-love. The 21st century didn't kill the soul, it Monetized it. Now, even authenticity has a price tag. You're not just expected to be happy, you're expected to prove it, daily, to strangers. Each post, each story, becomes a small prayer to the algorithm. See me, approve me, keep me visible. But perfection is heavy. It costs sleep, silence, peace. Behind every perfectly arranged photo lies a quiet panic. What if they stop liking me? What if I disappear? We've turned our insecurities into a performance art and called it empowerment. The pressure is invisible but relentless. Be successful, but effortless. Be spiritual, but marketable. Be vulnerable, but photogenic. Be real, but only the kind of real that gets engagement. And so we run, endlessly refreshing, endlessly curating, endlessly exhausted. Even the ones who seem untouched by it, the influencers, the teachers, the enlightened ones, live under the same gravity. The algorithm never sleeps. Miss a day, and you vanish. Miss a trend, and you're forgotten. We used to fear death. Now we fear obscurity. And the saddest part, we built this system ourselves, pixel by pixel, post by post, until the illusion became more comfortable than the truth. Carl Jung warned that when we deny our shadow, it doesn't disappear, it grows stronger, waiting to erupt. Maybe the endless scroll is that eruption. Maybe every selfie, every manic pursuit of relevance, is the shadow screaming, "Look at me before I fade." We are a species addicted to applause, terrified of silence. And silence is where truth lives. This is the paradox of our time. We have never been more connected, and never more alone. We have never been more visible, and never more afraid to be truly seen. Clarity does not arrive as comfort. It arrives as a fracture. At first, it feels like light, liberating, even divine. But once it settles, you begin to notice its cost, the distance it creates between you and the world you thought you knew. When you start seeing through illusion, the first thing you lose is belonging. Not because you choose to withdraw, but because your perception no longer fits the rhythm of collective blindness. You become sensitive to falseness, not only in others, but in yourself. It's the same phenomenon Carl Jung described as individuation, the painful process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the mask society has placed on you. Modern psychology offers a parallel idea. Studies on heightened self-awareness show that individuals who process information deeply, who reflect, observe, and self-monitor, often experience higher levels of existential anxiety. A 2018 study published in Frontiers in Psychology found that people with above-average emotional intelligence reported stronger feelings of loneliness and social fatigue. It seems that when perception sharpens, isolation becomes a side effect. You begin to see subtleties most people overlook. Micro-expressions, contradictions, the quiet tone someone uses when they say, "I'm fine." Your empathy becomes almost physiological. Your body feels what others hide. In neuroscience, this is linked to mirror neurons, the cells that allow us to feel what others feel. For some, this capacity becomes overwhelming. The brain's insula, a region tied to empathy and interoception, stays hyperactive, a storm of emotional data that never fully quiets. And so, clarity becomes both gift and burden. The world appears transparent, but you are the only one who notices the cracks. Conversations that once felt simple now require effort, because you can no longer pretend you don't sense what's unsaid. You hear the performance beneath the words, the insecurity behind confidence, the longing behind cynicism. This is the paradox of lucidity. It expands your understanding of human nature while simultaneously distancing you from it. Psychologists call this the empathy paradox. The more you understand people, the harder it becomes to participate in their illusions. You still care, but you no longer belong. And the result is a peculiar kind of silence. It's not emptiness, it's awareness stripped of noise. You begin to prefer solitude, not out of misanthropy, but as an act of preservation. Because solitude allows your nervous system to reset after constant overstimulation. It gives space for reflection, and reflection is where insight matures into wisdom. Still, the mind resists. It wants connection. It wants to feel part of something. But connection without authenticity now feels hollow. You crave depth, and depth is rare currency in a world obsessed with surface. This is what Jung meant when he wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate what seems important." The awakened mind is surrounded by people, yet starved for resonance. So yes, clarity isolates, but not as punishment. It's the psyche's way of cleansing perception, forcing you to see what remains when illusion dies. And what remains, though quieter, is real. Because at the edge of isolation, something begins to shift. Your silence starts to sound like truth. Your solitude begins to feel like sanctuary. And slowly, painfully, you realize this separation was never exile, it was initiation. Every form of clarity begins as disruption. It dismantles the illusions that once held you together, leaving you momentarily exposed to the raw truth beneath appearance. But what first feels like loss slowly transforms into something far more profound, an unshakable form of stability, born not from control, but from understanding. At first, you mistake sensitivity for weakness. You think, why do I feel everything so deeply? Why does the world seem louder to me than to others? Yet, with time, you begin to perceive that what once isolated you was never fragility, it was refinement. Your nervous system, tuned to subtle frequencies, was not designed to thrive in noise but to decode it. And the moment you stop fighting that sensitivity, it becomes your instrument of discernment, a lens through which you see reality as it truly is, not as it pretends to be. Carl Jung described this stage as the point where consciousness begins to integrate the shadow, turning awareness into wisdom. When you stop rejecting the darkness within and around you, you cease to be controlled by it. Instead of running from contradiction, you begin to inhabit it, understanding that light and shadow are not enemies, but necessary dimensions of the same truth. This is not mere philosophy, it has biological echoes. Modern neuroscience shows that when the brain faces psychological discomfort, when we allow ourselves to hold paradox rather than rushing to resolve it, neural networks responsible for cognitive flexibility and emotional regulation grow stronger. Studies from Harvard's Center for the Developing Child found that reflective self-awareness activates both the prefrontal cortex, logic, decision-making, and the limbic system, emotion and empathy. In essence, the act of reflection itself builds resilience. By staying conscious through pain, the mind literally rewires itself toward balance. In daily life, this shift manifests quietly. You stop reacting impulsively to provocation. You pause before absorbing someone else's chaos. You sense that not every conflict requires participation. This isn't detachment, it's alignment. It's the point where empathy becomes intelligent, where you can feel deeply without drowning in what isn't yours. Spiritual traditions have long intuited what science is only beginning to measure, that awareness, when combined with self-regulation, produces coherence across mind and body. Your thoughts slow down, your breath steadies, your perception widens. You begin to sense connections that aren't visible, emotional undercurrents, symbolic patterns, intuitive guidance. This is not fantasy, it's attunement. What once felt like isolation now becomes a sanctuary of lucidity. In solitude, you begin to notice the world as if for the first time. The subtle intelligence of silence, the calm behind uncertainty, the way truth never shouts but hums quietly beneath everything false. You realize that awareness, when sustained, is a form of power, not dominance over others, but mastery over your own perception. Jung believed that true individuality emerges only after this integration, when a person no longer identifies solely with their light or their shadow, but learns to move fluidly between them. This movement is what he called individuation, the process of becoming whole. And modern psychology supports this idea. Emotional maturity is not about eliminating darkness, but about expanding tolerance for complexity. A mature mind is one that can witness suffering without collapsing, hold joy without attachment, and meet uncertainty without panic. When this balance begins to stabilize, something inside you shifts irrevocably. You start to recognize the difference between noise and truth, between reaction and response, between stimulation and meaning. And once you taste this form of clarity, you no longer crave constant affirmation or belonging. You stop looking outward for validation because the quiet within you finally feels like home. That is the hidden gift, the realization that clarity was never meant to isolate you but to initiate you into depth. You begin to understand that your perception, sharpened through pain, was not a curse but a compass. It guides you not away from life, but into it, deeper, slower, and more consciously than before. And with that, the burden of seeing becomes the privilege of understanding. You no longer fear your awareness. You trust it, because what once felt like too much has now become enough. True growth is not about choosing light over darkness. It is about learning to walk between them without losing your center. After awakening, the world does not suddenly become kinder or easier. People don't change because you have changed. The illusions remain, the performances, the noise, the contradictions, but your relationship to them transforms completely. You begin to perceive that awareness is not meant to isolate you from the world. It's meant to prepare you for it. What once triggered you now teaches you. What once drained you now reveals where your boundaries belong. Instead of trying to control every outcome, you start cultivating presence, a psychological steadiness that allows you to meet life as it is, without collapsing under it. Carl Jung wrote that no tree can grow to heaven unless its roots reach down to hell. He meant that integration requires contact with both realms, the divine and the destructive, the noble and the flawed. You cannot embody peace if you refuse to meet your own chaos. And strangely, The more you accept your contradictions, the more coherent you become. This coherence has a neurological reflection. Research in psychophysiology shows that emotional regulation increases when the prefrontal cortex, our seat of reasoning, synchronizes with the limbic system, our emotional core. This state, known as neurocoherence, reduces reactivity and expands empathy. In simple terms, you stop being ruled by instinct and start responding with intelligence. The ancient mystics called it equanimity. Neuroscience calls it integration. In daily life, this balance looks ordinary, almost invisible. It's the pause before replying to anger, the decision to rest instead of react, the quiet confidence of not needing to prove yourself when provoked. It's the subtle wisdom of realizing that protecting your peace is not selfishness, it's self-respect. Your empathy changes texture. It matures from rescue to recognition. You no longer rush to fix everyone's pain. You learn to witness it without absorption. You sense that every person must face their own shadow, just as you did, and that love, when grounded in awareness, gives space instead of suffocation. Jung called this the birth of the self, the moment when consciousness stops oscillating between extremes and begins to hold the tension between them. Psychology today echoes this through the concept of integration of opposites. The mature psyche doesn't avoid polarity, it uses it as fuel for insight. This is why some of the most peaceful people you'll ever meet are not naive. They are seasoned by darkness, yet unharmed by it. As your awareness stabilizes, life becomes paradoxically simpler. You stop chasing constant highs because you no longer fear stillness. You stop demanding perfection from others because you've made peace with your own imperfection. And in this acceptance, energy once spent on conflict returns to creation. Even the external world, still filled with its noise, competition, and chaos, begins to feel like a mirror rather than a threat. You start recognizing projections as invitations to grow, criticism as information rather than insult, and solitude as alignment, not absence. This is self-mastery, not control over life, but cooperation with it. Modern studies in contemplative neuroscience call this meta-awareness, the ability to observe your inner experience while staying engaged in the outer world. It's a rare psychological state where perception becomes panoramic. You see both the event and the awareness watching it. When this stabilizes, your emotional life becomes less like a storm and more like an ocean. Waves still rise, but the depth beneath them remains calm. And so, between light and shadow, you learn to breathe differently. You no longer run from the darkness, because you understand that every shadow simply marks where the light is blocked. You meet fear not with denial but with curiosity. You understand that the purpose of awareness is not to escape humanity, but to redeem it, starting within yourself. At the end of the journey, you realize that awakening was never about escaping the world. It was about learning how to see it without distortion. You understand that enlightenment doesn't mean eternal bliss. It means living with open eyes in a world that prefers to sleep. And yes, it can be lonely, but it's a loneliness filled with meaning. You no longer crave to be understood by everyone, because understanding has replaced approval. You no longer search for constant companionship, because solitude has become dialogue, not with absence, but with essence. The silence that once felt like exile now feels like belonging to something wider, something eternal. Carl Jung believed that the individual who becomes conscious does not withdraw from life, but re-enters it with new eyes. After individuation, the soul returns to the marketplace, carrying the same ordinary face, yet everything it touches is transformed. You begin to see that the true purpose of awareness is not isolation, but contribution. You become a quiet node of clarity in a network of noise, not louder, but clearer. Modern psychology has a term for this shift: self-transcendence. It describes the stage where personal identity expands beyond the ego's limits and begins to include others, nature, and the collective whole. Studies by researchers like David Yaden at Johns Hopkins suggest that self-transcendent experiences, whether through meditation, awe, or reflection, dissolve the boundaries of the self, replacing anxiety with interconnectedness. It's not the end of the self. It's the self in harmony with everything it once resisted. You start noticing how perception itself becomes an act of compassion. When you see the world without illusion, you stop demanding that it be perfect. You forgive more easily, not out of weakness, but out of recognition. Everyone is doing their best to wake up at their own pace. You realize that some people are not ready to see, and that's okay. The point was never to convert the sleeping, only to stay awake without bitterness. This is what it means to be too awake to belong. To walk among others with empathy, yet without the need to be mirrored. To love without attachment. To speak truth without superiority. To live in the world, but not be consumed by it. And in that quiet state of awareness, you finally understand what all the noise was trying to hide. That clarity, at its core, is love, love stripped of illusion, love that sees without needing to possess, love that endures because it understands. The eyes that once cursed their sensitivity now bless it. The mind that once sought belonging now becomes a refuge for others. And the heart that once felt too awake for this world finally realizes it wasn't meant to fit in. It was meant to light the way. And maybe that's what this whole journey was trying to show you, that belonging was never the point. The purpose of awakening was not to find a place among the crowd, but to find a rhythm within yourself that no crowd can silence. When the noise fades, when the last illusion dissolves, there is only awareness, still, luminous, and impossibly alive. You realize that the path between light and shadow wasn't leading you anywhere outside yourself. It was leading you here, to this moment of quiet understanding. Because once you learn to see without judgment, you stop searching for meaning in validation. You start to feel it pulsing in your own breath. That's the hidden secret of consciousness. It doesn't give you answers, it gives you presence. And perhaps awakening was never about gaining something new, but about remembering what was always there. The constant pulse beneath your thoughts. The silent witness behind every feeling. The unbroken awareness that no chaos can erase. Carl Jung called this the self, the center that contains all opposites, the eternal observer beneath the roles we play. It's not the person you show to the world, nor the mask you hide behind when you're afraid. It's the one who watches both, the one who never stopped watching. So if you've walked through illusion, loneliness, and silence, if you've learned to sit in darkness until your own eyes began to glow, then you have touched something few ever reach, the light that doesn't need permission to exist. This is what remains when all pretending ends. Not perfection, not peace without pain, but truth, deep, untouchable, and quietly radiant. One day you'll see that every loss was not destruction, but translation. That every moment of confusion was a language the soul used to introduce you to yourself. That clarity was never meant to make you fit in, it was meant to make you whole. And when the world grows loud again, as it always will, you will not hide from it. You will breathe through it. Because once you know what awareness feels like, you can never unlearn it. You may forget, you may drift, but something in you will always find its way back. To stillness, to depth, to truth. And in that moment of remembering, you'll know that your task was never to belong, It was to stay awake. If this message stirred something in you, let it linger. Don't rush to name it. Don't explain it away. Awareness doesn't need understanding to be real. It simply needs attention. And when you're ready, share what this clarity has shown you. In words, in silence, or simply by living more consciously than before. Because every awakened heart becomes a mirror for another. That's how the world changes, not all at once, but pulse by pulse. This is Hidden Mind, where awareness meets soul, and truth learns to breathe.